So first of all, I want to let you know that as an interviewer, I'm an absolute stringer today. I'm not necessarily going to give softballs, but I can tell you that the honor that I have to be an interviewer of somebody who is such a dear friend, and I'll add one thing to the, I'm sure the standard introduction was very impressive as Peter is, but I've got to tell you that of the people in Hollywood, this is one of the guys known as one of the menschiest of the people here. An individual who on weekends I would go over to, as a friend, seek advice, to give him actually advice about this book as an author. And 5 minutes into it, all he's doing is he's pouring out his heart in terms of asking me how he can help me be more successful. So this is one of the most wonderful people that I know. And even that said, I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a hard time to make it interesting for these folks, okay? And I do know some of where the good stories are buried. Actually, let's start here. People always ask me as an author, how long did it take you to write this book? And I think you and I both know the answer to that. How long did it take you to write this book?
Well, it was 35 years before I figured out the seminal element, and then about 3 years of writing. But it was a lifetime of experience that coached me.
So given that it's a lifetime to write a book like this, which is your whole set of experiences that goes into it, take us back to where story started being most meaningful to you at the beginning.
If I can, I'll tell you, that question came up recently. I was moderating a panel for Deepak Chopra in San Diego called Sages and Scientists for 2 days. And one of the guests there was Dr. Rudolph Tanzi, who was a famous Harvard doctor who is doing very leading research in Alzheimer's disease. How many people here would like to live to 100? We're healthy. Okay. You're all going to get Alzheimer's disease in one form or another. That was a shocking thing when he said that. And it struck me, because it brought me back to the point you made, it struck me that what was the real fear in Alzheimer's disease? We got engaged in this conversation for quite some time, struck up a relationship over it. And the fear is that you know what you lose? You lose your stories. You lose your memories of who you are, who everybody in context with you is, what they relate to you, and anybody around them thinks, my God, who are they? They don't have their story anymore. And there's no contextual relationship because there's no sharing of those stories. So we're made up of stories. Now, I figured that out hearing that, and he knew that, but the context of recognizing those stories start when you're born, and when you die and you leave them, but it's all in between, the stories what make up your life. So I always thought story was the icing on the cake, and when I found out the story was the cake. And the idea is that when you have that moment, you then venerate your whole life, and you look back and think, what are the stories that make up your life? And the idea is from the very beginning, these stories run you. They manage you. Right now, everybody has a story. It was my girlfriend, it was my boyfriend, I wonder if I should do this. They're all going on in your head while you're listening. Those stories are part of our lives, and they define us. So the question of when it really happened, to answer your question, it happened the times that I remember the most powerful stories that have run me in my life were very, very early. And they lay unconscious in my weeds till something re-triggered them. And that's what really started me, down the road of the book.
You're talking about stories running you. In the book, you talk about the concept of a backstory.
Right.
So let's talk about backstory. There's a wonderful story that Peter tells in the book about a time when he's a young CEO and he's going up and talking to somebody that's very important to him. And then he has a flashback to a story that's deeply intimidating him. It puts him in a very vulnerable place. Maybe you can start with the youthful story that I know still defines you, whether you like it or not, all the way to the funny anecdote of you foolishly tripping into that story again later in life.
Not so funny what happens later. These things have a way
I thought it was hysterical.
Sabotaging you. I was a very young boy, and I was going to a school, and I got in some fights there as a very young boy, and those are kinds of things that really are powerful or empowering or disabling for you. And I got in fight after fight in this new school for the first couple of months, and suddenly the headmaster called my family and came in and set me outside the door and said, he's no good, he's a bum, this is what he did, he's been in fights. And I'm listening to this story being told about me, And it just wasn't true. Yes, I had been in fights, but I was protecting myself because my lunch money was being taken every day by these older kids and beaten up and all kinds of things. I was much smaller then. And I held up the lunch tray and he broke his hand when he tried to hit me. And I'm no good, I'm a bum, I'm not worthy, doesn't understand authority. And I said, that's not my story. I jumped up to go in, and as I walked in the room, the headmaster had festooned across his chest, because he was also the Eagle Scout master for the whole scout thing, all these medals and all these things across his chest, and his hat and everything, and it freaked me out. The whole authority of it, just all my sphincters just closed up like that. And I ran out.
That was really very visual. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
And I ran out and got thrown out. I didn't tell my story, let somebody else tell my story, and it ate my lunch. And for years, after that, even when I would be driving at 17 or 20 years old or 25 years old, and I'd see a police car come behind me in the red and blue lights, it wasn't even for me, they were gonna pass me, I would immediately freak out, because the authority of that brought that whole experience to bear, repeated it in some form or another. And, but it diminished and finally, went away. I mean, virtually went away. And then a quarter of a century later, I was chairman CEO of Sony, and the owner, Marita, asked me to fly to Japan to meet the king of Thailand, because Thailand was where all the piracy was. That's where our music and our films and our television, even the software for the electronics company, which I didn't run, was being pirated, and piracy was the most rampant in Thailand. So what happened was, he said, you got to prepare, we're going to meet the king, we got to try to persuade him. I kept thinking, King of Thailand, I'm going to meet Yul Brynner, and so we flew all the way there, and I practiced what I do. I came up with a real interesting plan. I knew he was a musician, and I found this story. And I didn't know anything about story then in the sense of telling purposeful stories. I knew about storytelling, different. So I thought I'd tell him about this musician who really lost his whole proprietary interest in his copyrights, and he had to really go and do something else in his life instead of the passion that drove him, his music, and how terrible it was, and how unfair it was, and that this was a product like the products he made in his country. And I thought that would, interest him and move him. Again, I didn't know really about how to deploy the tools. So I went and we landed in Thailand with $100,000 worth of Sony equipment and white gloves and pomp and circumstance, and we go to the palace. Now, the palace ceiling was as high as this, and it's 3 times as big as this. And you walk in, you went, ooh, palaces and churches and temples, they make you feel little, they just have that kind of effect on you. So what happened was, I walked in, I was totally prepared, completely organized, rehearsed everything. I knew exactly what to do, and I was the chairman, CEO, I got to have presence. As I walk in, everyone goes from different places, I go nuts. There's this guy with this white outfit with 1 million badges across his chest and the hat on. And my head starts going like this, and I went, it was just ringing in me. And I said, not this time, buddy. I'm going to suck it up. I'm not letting this sabotage me. And I really did. I recognized that. I got myself together, barely on the edge, but I went in and I charged in. I went right to him, and I started telling the story about this, this artist. And I related to him that he was an artist too, and he was nodding, affirmatively, and I was having the whole really good directional conversation. I felt really positive about it, felt good about it, felt good about myself, overcame, everything was great. And about 3/4 of the way through, I see Maria on the other end of the room going, no, and I keep finishing, go a little faster and finishing. I'm finished. All of a sudden I feel a tug on my arm. He says, Guber-san, what are you doing? I said, the king. He understands it. I think we really made great headway. He says, Guber-san, that's not the king, that's the guard. That's the king.
So, let me just pause for a second. By the way, it's a good ending to the story. He goes on and he has a wonderful conversation with the actual king, who basically throws up his hands and says, I'm sorry, my music's getting ripped off here too, so I can't do anything about it. But look, first of all, let's just pause for a second. Do you acknowledge the art form of a great storyteller? Right? I just watched you leaning in, riveting, the way he took you, and Peter has a wonderful line, which is that storytelling is emotional transportation. And if you let that sink in, he took you through a series of emotions so purposefully. And what's interesting is he also teaches us that storytelling is not for the narcissistic service of the person telling the story, but it's for you all. And it was wonderful to watch you all be brought through that story. So before the end of today, what I can promise you, and what I can also promise you in terms of the book, is that he will teach you, and he teaches us, how to be more effective in our lives at telling stories. And there's actually a formula around it that most of us haven't thought about. We just think of it as an art form. But I still want to stay on the backstory piece, and then we'll come back to the formula of storytelling in a moment. But I want to stay on the backstory. I mean, this is only slightly unrelated, but I know that you cover it in the book when you deal with our backstories. So much of a backstory, for many of us, sometimes our backstories need to be deprogrammed. And that backstory was with you at negative moments throughout your life. Are you ever afraid of this is a whole different question, but are you ever afraid of deprogramming the negative backstory for fear that you won't be who you are?
You are the warts and the scars and the bangs and the fall downs of your life. That's what makes it interesting. If it was all this way, it'd be pretty boring. But the idea of the vicissitudes of life and how they play and the ups and downs and the different notes is what makes the life colorful. You know, the contextual reality of living a life is, you know, failure and success, whether it's small in somebody else's view and monumental in yours, or monumental for everybody's. You know, we all love the drama. That's too seductive of the person going down, and for them too, and then pulling himself back up. What better thing is there? We know that, because we're all, you know, we're not immune to that. But the interesting thing, if I just take 1 second and talk about that, Keith uses the word, and I have to disabuse everybody of this. It's not storytelling. There is storytelling. Movies, television, great storytelling. I'm a storyteller. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about telling stories, telling purposeful stories to move people to action, to cause or incite in them a call to action. Buy my product, vote for my candidate, find my client not guilty, join my club, contribute to my charity, whatever it is, give me a raise, give me a promotion. Whatever it is, when you're using that, he uses the word emotional transportation, you're using that vehicle of the story to transport somebody so they will do something. They will move their feet, their tongue, their decision, their vote. That's the distinction. You know, it's the accent's on the wrong syllable when you say storytelling, because everyone thinks of da-da-da-da, dancing and laughing and people. No. This is about using it as a vehicle to carry people into action.
What do you think the biggest mistake is? So everybody in here is a salesperson, they're a careerist, they're a passionate individual trying to sell their missions in life, etc. You all need to tell better stories in your lives. What do you think the biggest mistakes are?
First of all, I think it's kid stuff. It's soft stuff. Yeah, it's real soft, except when the chips are down, that's what counts. And it's real soft, except the very best people on the planet, the very best in every single field, that's where they are. Whether it's people selling products like Steve Jobs or Howard Schultz, or whether it's presidents like Clinton or other people, or sports characters, you know, all my sports business, it's always the element. That's how we connect. We are wired to tell each other stories. We do not disperse information. Information is not resonant, not memorable, and not actionable. It's absolutely crucial. Analytics, facts, figures, information are crucial, but they have to be embedded in an emotional experience if they're going to be resonant, memorable, and actionable.
So I'm going to ask you to tell one of the great stories about your interactions in Cuba in a moment. But what you're really getting to is that storytelling isn't about data dumping. And so many of us, I think, when we go in to try to convince somebody of our argument, we think that the data is what you lead with, because I don't know why. We obviously have, you're trying to disabuse us of that belief. So it's not about the data. It's about what story you wrap around the data. Maybe you can first of all talk a little bit about how do you use data, because data is still necessary. People still need the information. How do you use data in context of a story the next time we go out to sell our point of view or our product, and at the same time conjure up a story, maybe it's Cuba, maybe it's another, that really hits home that fact of influence?
Data, analytics, facts are proof of process. They're critical. They're absolutely necessary. But if you fire them, they're aimed here. So where flops are born. Here's where hits are born. If you aim here and it migrates here, you've got a powerful ally. They can pay that story forward. They are emotionalizing their movement and metabolizing the facts, data, and information. Because, let me ask this question the other way. How many people here have been in a hotel room 4 months ago? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people remember the exact hotel? Half of you? How many people remember the room number? Probably none of you. How many people remember what you ordered at that dinner that night in the room? Nobody. But if your husband called you and said, I just got the giant promotion, we can buy the new house, or if your wife called you and said, I'm pregnant, we're going to have a baby boy, or if somebody said to you, watch this, I love you, or if you had sex with a great stranger in that room, or you had food poisoning, or robbed, you'd never forget that room, the room number, or the information. Proof. That facts, bonded with that emotion, just goes in you. It's metabolized in you. That's what it works everywhere. And you do that by, if you will, using a narrative, telling purposeful stories to create that emotional connection, that relationship connection, that whole value. It's not about being a storyteller, because it doesn't even have to be your story. It's about recognizing, why do you look at somebody when you go into a room? Why? Because that's the way you're wired and that's the way it works. You are all tellers and listeners and advocates of story. Let me just give you this. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here now. I don't mean here. You wouldn't be here now. 40,000 years ago, 30,000, 20,000, 10,000, we had no digital O's and ones. None. Let me give you a different one. My auntie's 105 today. When she was born, there weren't no phones, there weren't nothing that you know. And one lifetime before that, there weren't even books. I mean, two people read books. So you got 40,000 years of wiring of oral narrative. 40,000. It's in your DNA. We couldn't have passed along the rules, values, tribes of our tribe without that. Think about this. Think about this. We were at the bottom of the food chain. Not as tough as a rhinoceros, not as big as an elephant, not as fast as a cheetah. How did we survive? Evolutionary advantage. We developed language so we could pass amongst ourselves the rules, values, strategies, and tactics. We could work together. That's what telling of stories allows people to do. And more importantly, to pass them along without the written word, because they're embedded here. That's how we survive. You think LinkedIn and Twitter made social cohesion? Now, you got to be kidding me. How about 40,000 years of it? Not Twitter. You know, Twitter will be gone by the time the thing happens. But the point is, you're wired that way. So you just have to, it's not a gift from me to you. That's ridiculous. You got it. All I was saying is, shine the light on it. Look at it. You got it inside you. Why wouldn't you get yourself in state when something important you want to do? Get someone to vote for you, join your company, do whatever you want. Why wouldn't you get yourself in state and recognize that's something you have? Use it.
I'm tweeting that out, by the way, right now. But while I'm tweeting this, tell us the Castro, I was going to say tell us the Castro story, but tell us the Castro victory. Because I just love that story of influence.
I scratch my head because, you know, one of the dangers of doing this, you know, in this profession, and Keith knows me for quite some time, one of the dangers is you got a lot of storytelling you can do. Because you live an interesting life, you're always with fascinating people, and you could go on and do that, or be a raconteur. I don't want to be that way. That's not what I want. I did that in my life.
By the way, how many of you want to hear the Castro story?
Okay.
All right, so there you go.
But we
don't care what you want.
You got to hear the prelude. You got to hear the prelude, because the prelude is what I've learned from those things. The idea is, if it isn't in service of what I want to present to you or share with you, then it's just a story. You laugh, you amuse. But the idea is, what's its purpose? Now, I didn't know its purpose then. I know its purpose now, and I did it. That makes the point. I did it there. It happened there. It happened naturally. And that's what the magic of this is. It's all natural. It's the way you're wired. So what happened was and it was in the 80s, early middle 80s, something like that. And we had a good-sized company, a big company, German-Dutch company, Polygram. I was the chairman and CEO. It was a big company. Philips and Siemens were joint ventures in it. Really big company in entertainment business. And I had ventured to do a show which was called a nature show. It's today what could be called a reality show, very much so. 17 Navy SEALs and Miss Universe. That's a reality show. Anyways. And we went all around the world, Ocean Quest, looking at what was happening in the oceans of the world. Diving with the whales in the Dominican Republic, under the ice in the Antarctica, really to examine with the National Geographic, really to determine, you know, what was happening in the oceans and how we relate to it, and most importantly, put you, the audience, in the shoes of Sean Weatherly, who was Miss Universe, so because we wouldn't get into the Navy's SEAL shoes, you'd think they're distant shoes. So we had to put somebody like that in it. And one of the key scenes, one of the key values was going to the forbidden waters of Havana Harbor, which hadn't been dived since 1959, or really pristine. And getting permission to go to Cuba in itself was a trial and tribulation. Used various people from Kissinger and Nixon, who were virulent anti-Castro, and that was the best person to get us permission to go to Cuba. Otherwise, they seize your boats, they seize everything. So we went there. And we after, this is the key of this whole 12-part series, and we didn't have permission from the Cuban government yet to dive in Havana Harbor. We had it in the periphery and in the outer atolls and the reefs, but not there. And that was the key element. That was the gravamen of the whole story. And so we go there, we sit in Havana Harbor with our boats. And the Havana Harbor is bigger than Marina del Rey, and there were no boats there, just our boats. You can imagine what it looked like. It looked like some scene from out of the apocalypse. So anyways, we're sitting there and we're waiting for Castro. 1 day, 2 day, 3 day. We were going to have to leave. We weren't going to get permission. And then suddenly, the Cuban person, head of the Cuban interest mission, came and said, okay, El Presidente is coming here. He's going to spend 10 minutes. You have a chance to present your case. I said 10 minutes will be fine for the information. We'll give him all the information. He says, no photographs, no autographs, and no gifts. Great. So we go there. He comes with the dog smell, and they look around the whole boats, and he comes, and Castro shouts. Everyone had to take off their boots to get on the boat. I know you don't have to. Yes, I have to. He takes off his boots, shakes hands with everybody, and I'm ready. I got it down perfect. I got all the equipment lined up on the deck. And I knew he was an aficionado of diving, but I also knew that the CIA, and he knew, tried to kill him by poisoning his regulator about 8 years earlier. So he was a little bit anxious about all that. So we had it all laid out, and I had a couple of charts with bullet points and facts about, you know, how many people would see the show, and all those kinds of things, all the information, how much the show cost and what it was, blah, 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 all of it organized. I was buttoned up. I went there, and as soon as he came on, I shook his hand, and I started firing those bullet points, all the facts and all the data, all the information. Really pertinent, well put together, documented, and I knew he had 10 minutes. And about 8 minutes in, 7 minutes in, if you looked around, he sees his watch. As soon as he sees his watch, his whole team starts to move towards the gangplank to leave. And I think, oh my God, all this equipment here, everything like that, he wasn't really that interested. And he wasn't interested in the fact, he's leaving. And suddenly, Sean comes up on deck, Weatherly in her bathing outfit, because she just finished shooting. And that piece of equipment got his attention. And she comes up, and she was carrying up a megalodon tooth. Now, a great white shark, you all know what a great white shark is, like 22, 23, 24, 25 feet, would ring terror in any group of human beings in the planet. Its tooth is about the size of this digit of your thumb, and they have like 140 in the mouth. So a pretty gaping thought. Megalodon shark lived for 100 million years. It was the predecessor to the great white shark, and it prowled the waters of the South Atlantic, essentially. And they find these teeth in the riverbeds. They dig them up out of the riverbeds in South Carolina, and the teeth are as big as your hand. One! So you can imagine how big, your imagination, how big that shark would be. Could swallow the stage. It was just gigantic. It was a gigantic animal. He picks up the tooth, he starts looking at it, and I start telling him the story, just intuitively, about this shark and all about it, and it prowled these waters. And I see he's like fascinated. He's totally interested in this tooth. Totally, completely. So I begin to say, intuitively, you know, this is the same thing. You know, this tooth represents a shark that's no longer here. And our show, long after we're all gone, will tell the story of your fantastic Havana Harbor. It will live beyond us. We have to tell that. So I went through the whole thing that way. He stayed for 2.5, 3 hours. He gave us all kinds of presents. He sat down in our suite downstairs when we had this huge sailboat. Sat down on my wife's dressing table, makeup table, signing all the T-shirts, you know, taking the pictures, and giving us permission to do the whole thing. And I remember when he left, somebody said to me, "What did you do?" I said, "I didn't do anything. I just told him the story about the tooth." And I never realized what the impact of it was. I understood the result, but what I want to say to you, it wasn't some great thing I did. It was just intuitive. And that's the way you want. If you listen to your intuition, when and you want to be interested in what they're interested in, rather than trying to be interesting. I was trying to be interesting in the beginning. Instead, once he was interested in it, use that as a vehicle to get their attention first, and then their intention second. So now I didn't decode that and learn that and get that until I went back and spent this lugubrious last 2 years doing this, experience called writing a book. That's hard. But the point is, it's all natural. That was the magic of it. The magic was, it's in you. It's not a gift.
So let's start teaching this audience now what you do so naturally and how you've had to dissect the process.
Okay.
Let me start with one tip. I think a lot of great stories have some element of surprise to them, don't they? I mean, you've just told 2 stories, one of which talked about the guard. That was a wonderful little twist of comedy. The surprise of Miss America coming up and that twist. How important is surprise? And do you engineer it, or, I mean, you gotta think for this audience's sake. Give some of the key tips. Maybe surprise is one of them.
Okay.
That they should be thinking about.
Emotionally transport somebody. You want to emotionalize a platform. That doesn't mean that your subject has to be, it doesn't have to be about your subject that you want the person to do. It's just creating an emotional palette between you. In telling purposeful stories, in telling them, I'd say there are 5 elements. I won't do that right now. But 4 of them, a nincompoop could do. They're all about telling. They're nothing about story. It's telling. It's what you do. It's how you move your tongue and your feet. It isn't there's no art form to it. I have to disabuse you of the fact that you have to be some kind of orator or some kind of, John Grisham or Robert Frost. Nothing. All you have to be is breathing. All right? So, now if you have trouble with that, you should exit now. But the point is, that's the point. So those 4, and any one of those can change the game for you. Now, why is that so? Well, this is what I learned in my lifetime. I share with you. Success and failure are this close together. Inside every great success are the seeds of abysmal failure. I've experienced it. Cataclysmically, publicly, painfully. Inside of every failure are the opportunities for great success. They're marginally close together. They're very close together. So if you buy that, then you recognize then something as much as 2, 3, 4, 5% can be a complete game changer. It can be a complete game changer. So you can have more joy and more success, or more pain and more failure. Which one do you want? Success, failure. Let's figure it out. Okay, if you want the pain and failure, go see a therapist immediately. I can't help you. But if you want more joy and more success, I can assist you by saying that any one of these elements, of these 5 or 6 or 7 elements, can be a game changer. It can take 12, 13 strokes off your game. You're not going to be Tiger Woods or Phil Mickelson as a golfer, but you'll be that much better. And when success and failure are that close together, those 1 or 2 little things can make the whole difference. So, for example, when you look at the last component, what's the story? Here's what you say. It's any story that has drama, challenge, conflict, resolution. Any story. Any. Not your story. Your story's best, but any story. Telling a purposeful story to set the stage. Now you say, well, I don't know what drama is. Listen, you know the constitutional definition of obscenity? I know it when I see it. That was what it was. I know it when I see it. Well, drama, you know it when you feel it.
So the last story that was told, and another word for drama is also struggle to some extent. I mean, you created the struggle in yourself. It's like you were losing this guy. Here's a critical player to him being able to do this movie. Probably millions of dollars were in the flux, and he's doing all this stuff, and he's just at the edge, right? And the struggle, you felt it, you were right there in his shoes, in the hero's shoes, which, by the way, is another tip that he makes, which is in the process of telling a story, you become the protagonist in the story, meaning the audience. And through the middle, and you often say, make sure that the sort of the peak, the middle of the story is the struggle that you're telling. And then he resolves it with a twist, which is the fact that Sean comes up. And then you start to relax a little bit into the excitement of the hero's journey and now the possibility. So he talks about the 5 big lessons that he teaches us in the book, which is true. There are the 5 major points. But what I got from your book, more than importantly, were all the little nuanced tips. Like something like as simple as put the struggle in the middle of the story. So you're ramping up to it, and then you give the people the excitement afterwards.
Or find a story that has it. You don't have to create the story. That's what I want to tell you. You do not have to invent the story. Invented here isn't what it is. When you tell a joke that someone told you to somebody else, you didn't invent the joke. You don't even give them credit. You'd say, let me tell you my joke. All right? So the point is, you do this all the time naturally. You just have to recognize it. One of the things I wanted to point out to you about drama is, you know, when you see it and you feel it. I'll tell you a quick story. Tell them stories. So it's 1991. Michael Jackson was a superstar. I mean, a superstar. And he wanted to do, he was a music guy, as you know, and he wanted to do movies. Everyone was suspicious that, you know, what does he know about drama? What does he know about movies? What does he know about storytelling? And that was a question you had to ask, you know. So when he called me at my house, actually called my son 3 times and hung up on him, he said, there's somebody funny on the phone. I said, no, that's not funny. You're not funny at all. Get him back on the phone. So anyways, he said, I want to do the movie. Can we meet? And I went to his house for a lunch, and he said, I said to him, so, how do you know what drama is? You know, melody is one thing, and music performance is another thing, but if you're going to produce these films, not necessarily star in them, do you really understand that? Different than what we're talking about. That was storytelling. And he said, well, I don't know. He said, you be the judge. He says, come upstairs. Go upstairs to his upstairs area, and he has a terrarium out there in his back. A big glass terrarium. He points to the thing. I said, look, and there's this boa constrictor. The biggest snake you ever saw. I actually took a step back from the terrarium because, you know, thought that could get out of the terrarium. I always imagine a little kid, you know, one of those movies in the Amazon, the snake is wrapped around your neck, I could die, you know. So I didn't want to be too close to that snake. And he says, that's Muscles. That's the name for the snake. Muscles. That's all I had to hear. Muscles. I didn't like that. Anyways, I said, yes. Well, I'm thinking, what is he showing me the snake for? And he goes like this. Over on the other side, there's this little white mouse about this big, going like shaking. And I said, oh my God. I said, yeah? I said, yeah, I get it. The snake's going to eat the mouse. He says, right. I says, so? He says, that's not the drama. It's how and when. That's the drama. The mouse had the snake's attention, the snake had the mouse's attention, and Michael had my attention. He understood what drama was. It wasn't necessarily the result, it's the transportation, how you get there, what it meant, you know, what it was. And the idea of understanding that it's so simple to recognize because you recognize it here in your gut. You don't have to recognize it here in your head. You recognize it in your gut. You know it when you see it. And I think that's the key. And the idea is that when you are going to move somebody to action, what you have to do with your facts, data, and information, when you do it with them, the idea of being in an emotional state, creating an emotional resonance between you, it's powerful. Really powerful.
Michael physically took you somewhere to convince you that he knew and understood the power of story. And and it's interesting, this Friday I'm going to be in Phoenix, and I get to meet somebody who you know very well, Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
And I've heard you tell a story about how Muhammad Ali got you, and more importantly, the marketers who were on a movie that you were doing about Muhammad. And he used the act of physically moving people into the story. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, how important that is. And it's not necessarily just sitting and telling, but the physical movement also helps you move the emotion.
And the truth is, the recipients of these things usually remember it long after the person who tells you it does. This was 40 years ago. I bumped into him a number of years ago and told him the story. But, oh yeah, he dimly remembered the movie that we made. Dimly. I mean, and this guy's a brilliant guy. I know he's suffering from, I think, Parkinson's disease. But the point is, this was 40 years ago. But the story for me, as the recipient, as the listener, as the audience. See, I don't use the word customer, client, or patron. You know why? Transformational vocabulary, when you use those words, guess what the person does? I want you to be my customer, my client, or my patron. They protect their groin and their wallet, all right? You want to think of them as audiences and let them think it, and they open their heart up. And that becomes a much more resonant and powerful target.
By the way, just on that point, before he goes into the story of what Muhammad taught us, was the power of what you're just saying is that this emotional transportation is something that the artists out there do naturally, but what I've been really blessed by is that he's dissected that. I mean, you can start to see how all of these great stories, you could just leave them as great stories and be entertained. But what he's tried to do is his legacy. I mean, this is, when I first heard about this book, Peter said, look, I mean, I'm proud of the Oscar stuff. I'm proud of the work that I've done in entertainment. But he said, if I really want to leave a legacy on this planet, then what I really want to be able to do is make the audiences that I've entertained in the past be able to do this themselves. And that's when I realized what kind of a human this person was. It wasn't just about the money or the success of him doing it or working with others who were able to do it, but he really wanted to give us that talent, which Muhammad Ali didn't. I mean, God bless him, he's a wonderful guy, I'm sure, but he didn't care about teaching people that. This guy does, and that's what he's trying to do for us now. But tell us a little bit more about Muhammad Ali.
But the key is, again, there's no gift. You got it already. It's there. One of the saddest things is, think of the schools. I've been teaching for 40 years at the university, and full out, course after course, different kinds of courses. You know what struck me as amazing after all this? That we go to these elementaries and these middle schools, and even the high schools. They teach us facts and information, and they grade us on facts and information. They don't teach you how to meet somebody, how to get married, kind of an important thing in your life. They don't teach you anything in those areas. Nothing. Zero. Zero. They teach you how to and sharp. They teach you how to bend the metal and how to saw to the side. What's going on? Because we don't think it's important, this interpersonal relationship. We don't think it's important. And in business, it's critical. It's crucial.
So how did Muhammad Ali use physical movement, and then we're going to go to the audience questions.
40 years ago, he was going to do a movie for us. I was the president of Columbia Pictures, very young guy, and he wanted to do a movie for us, and we committed to the project, and it hadn't been really written yet. And he called one day, he was in town, and said, I want to come over to the office and meet three or four of the key executives who are going to plan on the marketing of the picture and the organization of the picture. He wanted to meet the chief executives and talk with them. He didn't even start the screenplay. Well, yeah, no, but it was Muhammad Ali. He said, okay. When are you going to say no? You come over and break down the door. So the idea is, he said yes. He comes to the room, comes to the office. He was sitting in the chairman of the whole studio's office. I was sitting there, and there was 4 or 5 of us in the room. I can't remember if there was 7 or 6 or 5, but a bunch of us. And he starts to talk about preparing for his film. And everybody was sitting there like this. Now, I was the youngest by 40 years, probably, all right? And they're all sitting there like this. He's going to tell us how to market and make his film, how to market his film and sell his film. Sitting there like this. And he starts giving all the information. Give the information, facts and figures, and all the information. He had done his homework, all the facts and figures, like this. He stopped about a minute into it, maybe a minute and a half into it. He turns around, looks at everybody. And silence is a powerful tool, more powerful than words sometimes. Everyone thought silence got your attention. He said, stand up, everybody stand up. Of course he stood up, he's Muhammad Ali. At that time he was the king of the world. He stood up. He said, we're gonna have a 10-round fight. Wow. He said, I want you to put your arms up and move your arms like this. Keep moving them, 10 3-minute rounds, there's a rest in between. Well, it's not be hard. You try doing it. Try doing it with 12 or 16-ounce gloves. Your arms will be like this. But the point is, they were all moving around. And he started telling the story of him preparing for this, I think it was the Thriller Manila fight, how he prepared for it, what his tactics was, his strategy. He's going through the whole thing. About the 3rd round, everyone's laughing. He's getting in everybody's face, doing this and going through the whole thing. By the 6th round, everybody got it. You had to be prepared to sell his film. And preparation was a strategy he wanted to impart to everybody. And everybody got it. Everybody got it. He did it too, just telling his own story of how he prepared for a fight and how important it was and how it made the difference. And he made them participants, not just passengers in the story. He physically interacted. Powerful element. And you know something? At the end, he was so smart. You know what he did? He asked if there was a photographer. And David brought in a photographer and took pictures with everybody, like this. And what do you think they did with those friggin' pictures? Everybody put it up on the wall, and every time somebody came into that office, they pointed the picture, and what do you think they told them? The story. And they were prepared.
So let's
that's
take
the magic.
let's take a little of your own advice, and let's talk about participation. So how about from the audience? There's a lady down front there. Oh, no.
Who's the most...
What's your name?
Christian Duran.
Thank you.
Who's the most fascinating person you ever worked with?
That's a hard question. That's a hard one. I mean, people are fascinating in different ways, and some of the most fascinating people were people that in the food chain that were working on a television show or in a sports business or something like that. They were totally fascinating because who they were and how they held their life and what they did and their contribution. So their fascination, I'd have to define that question a little differently. Their fascination was how they held their life and how they told their life story, or who they were, or their active contribution, or their purposefulness in their life. That's what defined them to me, not the station they had in life, but how they held their experiences. The inside that question, crack it open, because it's, if I may, what's really the most interesting element in my life, the thing I look at and go, wow, like that, are the people I met. The experiences of the people I met, not the awards, not the pictures, not the movies, not the sports team. It's just being with those people and just realizing they're human beings and they have foibles, and they have interests. You know, having lunch several days, 2 or 3 days with Richard Nixon was an incredible friggin' experience. You know, him making a tuna fish sandwich in his kitchen while he's talking about going to China. We did the show, Teddy White, The Selling of the Presidency. Met with all the presidents. It was an incredible experience. Having lunch with Pablo Picasso. You know, spending time, real quality time with the Dalai Lama. I mean, those are experiences you can never, ever, ever. They're inside you. You just, or Muhammad Ali, or even Castro, spending those hours with them several times. You just have a different impression.
What struck you more, though? Was it their extraordinariness or their basic humanity?
Their ordinariness, meaning they had the same dramas as all of you. Nixon was complaining about his daughter and what was happening with her and why she needed more money for this and that. I mean, all the same problems that I had. You know, the same. I said, yeah, I had that problem too. Why don't they get a job? You know, like a job. You know, he said, yeah, we got to get them a job. That's what they got to, and they got to know how it works. I mean, same things. And so you just found those things. With Picasso, we were sitting there. Great story. I got to tell a story. This is such a cool story. I was sitting with 6 people. It was in the south of France. It was in the 60s. And he was at the lunch table. There were 6 or 8 of us. And they were all talking and doing things. And I was like, it's Picasso. I kept saying his name, whispering, it's Picasso. Like, you know, like something was wrong. Anyway, so that when the check came and it was turned over, he had a pen. He just picked up the back of the check, and it was already paid. He was just drawing this little doodle on the back of the check. And I looked around that table. Every person on that table was like this, watching him. It was like nothing else. A rabbit could have fallen from the ceiling. It wouldn't have mattered. They were watching him. And then when he was done, we got up. He picked up the check. Everyone wanted to pick up the check. He picked up the check and ripped it up and put it down there. And I thought to myself, I wonder if that was the first time he did that. I mean, it was such an incredible experience. It stayed in my mind how that act captured everybody's complete and utter attention. Somebody was talking, they didn't even hear what was saying. They're like this. And so it's those experiences that make your life kind of interesting and rich and fun.
I heard a joke that, I don't know if it was a joke or not, but Picasso used to pay a lot of things with check, and on the back, he'd doodle something, because nobody would ever cash them.
I can believe that. I can believe that. I can believe that.
The lady right down front.
I just wonder, what happened in your youth that made you what you are today?
My mom and my dad, and I mean that not biologically. My mom and my dad had real values, and their feet and their tongue were in alignment. So they didn't say, you know, don't smoke or don't drink, but they can smoke and drink. They didn't say, don't give to others, don't be contributory. They did. They had that mantra, you know, that watch the direction of my feet. and you'll see the way to live. And I think that's really what gave me some of the, I don't want to use the word ideals, but some of the navigational stakes in my life that served me in a very seductive life where you could be seduced by a lot of things. I didn't lose my way, you know, and I had many big failures, and falls and faults and flops and everything, all kinds of things. I didn't lose my way internally. In other words, I knew that I was, you know, had a guided sense of, you know, purposefulness. So I think that's where I got it from my mom and my dad.
Yeah. And if you watch he and his wife together, it's definitely reinforcing that.
Hi, my name is Jo Nelson, and I just wonder, we've heard so many incredible stories without a mention of a woman's name in an incredible position or an incredible experience. I'd love to hear one.
Lots of women. In fact, I have daughters, you know, that are really that are magical and have taught me a lot. My daughters taught me certainly, I think, more than I taught them. But so many women really have made a difference in my life. There's one woman who tells purposeful stories, and her name is Norma Kamali, and she's a designer in New York, a very famous designer. She did all of the parachute wear and all those early bikinis in the 80s. And I met her back in the 1970s, and she became completely conditioned to the fact of her backstory. She was not particularly attractive, she was chunky, she didn't feel good, and she began designing clothes so she could feel good when she was very young. And she wanted to feel good. And she saw the purpose of that and how it worked in her story, in her life. And she reached a point in her life and she said, I have to turn this around. I'm selling these clothes for $6,000. I got to make people who don't have $6,000 and people who aren't, I don't know what the right size is, 4 or 2 or 6, whatever you guys think of the right size. I got to make sure they can feel good, because I know feeling good, clothes isn't what makes you look good, it makes you feel good. And I have to do that. And so she took all of her work and her monies and her time, and first she went to Walmart and convinced them that she could make, you know, really top quality clothes for women that didn't have those resources to have that opportunity. And then she developed a whole charitable element, major element around her work. And I thought to myself, this is a person that really understands the nature of her life. She understands that she was given this gift of design, and the way she had to give it back was not to make a lot of money, but to recognize that the value proposition of those designs was to make people feel good about themselves. And I watched her do that, and I thought to myself, that was actually the woman that led me to look at all the different areas rather than the normal areas of telling purposeful stories, to go to architecture, to go to food, and it was there in every area. But there's so many of those, you know, stories that I've been a part of. Susan Estrich, who ran the campaign, I was totally impressed with her. She was one of the heads of the DNC, and she ran the campaign for Dukakis, all right? And she was co-chairing the Clinton campaign. But she was an incredibly powerful and interesting woman who really shared with me the purpose of her life. She teaches now. And that the facts of how she tells her story of who she is and what she wants to do engages everybody and makes people feel that they too can have that opportunity. And I think I've learned so much from her, because I realized that when somebody is purposeful, when they really are guided by the view of being contributory, they're special and it shines through. You know what shines through? This is the thing, well, I'll tell you one other quick thing. When somebody walks into your office, this is a little counterintuitive, but when somebody walks into your office or your business or your school wanting to do something, before they speak the first word, you make a judgment. You make a determination. Your eyes review. You're wired that way. That's the way you're wired, before there's language. Survival, your reptilian brain is completely organized that way. Your mirror neurons in your eyes, we read about this, relate to people. So before you speak the first word, you know what you know? Are they authentic? Are they authentic? You have to know that. And that's what happens. So this is a person whose authenticity shines through when she comes into the room, and you wonder, how can that be? And then you're curious about that, because your intuitiveness says, how can that be? What is this about this person? And it's too good to be true. No, it's true, and it's good. So
in the back?
My question is, oftentimes initially when communicating with people, it's over email and you don't get a chance to tell that story in person. So do you have any tips on email storytelling?
Okay, all technology, every technology you know, every technology, all, 100%, not any technology, every single technology is interim. It's only interim long enough, it's good, it's only interim long enough if it can get a return on investment. Whether it's the radio, the television, the telephone, printing, anything, that's what it's about. What you pay forward, what society pays forward, is the intellectual capital, sometimes reputational capital, and certainly experiential capital of what it does, or what it connects. In our sense, what we're talking about in our lives, artist and audience. You can call the artist a producer, an executive, you can call him a manufacturer, a teacher, call him anything you want, and the audience is the customer, the client, that connection. Technology shortens the distance to those two places, gives benefit to both, benefit to the artist, or the teller, or whatever you want to call them, or benefit to the audience, customer, consumer. If it doesn't, it's a cold comfort. And any technology that doesn't give benefit to one or the other, preferably both, but one or the other, enrich the artist's palette, help the audience's experience, and I use those words metaphorically, artist and audience, then it will not last. So what does that tell you? It tells you the following, that state-of-the-art technology is nothing unless it's in service of state-of-the-heart technology. It's nothing. It's vacant. All the O's and ones, they're only in service of oohs and ahs. That's it. So if you use that as a metric, that you say to yourself, what do I do when I'm doing a text message? What do I do when I'm... Many of the same tools are completely available to you. You want to get the audience's attention. You want to have the right intention. You want to have a goal. You don't want to hide it. You want to understand that they are an audience and not try to transact with them, but create a relationship with them. You want to engage them not as passengers, but participants. All the same. Just the highest point is in the room, breathing the same air, face to face, there. That's the highest and best use. Why do you know that? Because let me ask you a question. If you were going to bet your whole business, your whole family, your whole life, your whole church on somebody doing something with you, do you think you'd want to have a tweet, 140-character text message, make the decision on that? Or would you like to be in the room breathing the same air and talk to them a little bit? You bet. You know you would. And everybody in the whole room would. Anybody tells you they wouldn't is a bumbling idiot. So the idea is you do that. Now, what if you can't do that? Then you use as many of the tools as you can that symbolize that are artifices for that. You see it all the time. A tweet of 440 characters, I tweet all the time. They do a little parenthesis and 2 dots, a smiley face. Why do they do that? Trying to create emotion. Or you put a little funny thing in, or you twist it. Because that's the way you know intuitively to be. So the answer is you can use all these tools, even if it's non-interactive, even if it's a video. What do you think when they do a television show? What do you think when Jay Leno interviews somebody? He wants to be interested. If he's trying to be interesting, you turn it off. And when he tries to be too interesting, you really turn it off. So the trick is, even in fixed media, many of the tools work. So you use what you can use, and you do what you can do.
Lily Steiner, thank you for your generosity. So my question's about what do you find more motivational to action? A positive story about where you can go, or a story about people who are not doing what they could be doing and so they're stuck?
That's a beautiful question. So why is it, let me ask the question back. Why is it that we're more likely to stay in the pain of where we are than to face the potential pain of uncertainty of the future? Why is it? Because our mechanism is survival. We would rather do anything to avoid pain than even get success. So the idea of pain is and fear and survival is such a driving force. So if you use something that's an admonition, it can be effective. You know, you put your finger in that plug with the water in your hand. That's dangerous. You could get electrocuted. And then you tell the story about the little kid who never really happened to put his finger in and got electrocuted, or he could paralyze the rest of his life. And that tells you the story. You know, a lot of times you can use fear to motivate people. It's not the best of tools. Not the best of tools. It doesn't have the endurance that sometimes that's something that's compelling, a compelling story, a compelling ideal that pulls you towards it, rather than fear that pushes you away from the fear. But the truth is, both are powerful tools, but both are drama. Both are ways of getting your attention. Both are ways of cutting through the cacophony of your bandwidth, which is convulsed with so much incoming. So the answer is both. But I would prefer that the better one is one that is compelling in a positive way. It's better for you as a teller, and it's better for the listener. But the other one works. I mean, we know it. We know it works. But the truth about fear, let me give you an acronym, interesting. The truth about fear is that 90% of the stuff you fear never happens. You spend a lifetime or a month or a week being fearful. And what is fear? Think of it this way. F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real. That's most of the time what it is. So the idea is, and then if you do that, what you focus on grows. I don't want to turn to the wall. I don't want to turn to the wall. I don't want to fail. I don't want to fail. I don't want to fail. Your brain doesn't know no. You know that. It doesn't know no. It knows fail, 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 fail. That's what you do. You fail.
In your book, you talk about how you weren't always conscious that telling stories was the key.
Right.
At what point in your life did you go, aha, this is the game changer? What spurred that realization?
Well, it was 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a failure. It was a difficult failure where if you read the book, it's a failure that I realized. I thought, here I was. I went to the entertainment capital of the world to present I owned the Dodgers AAA team, and I was negotiating for the main Dodgers team, and I wanted to build a AAA stadium, Major League Baseball stadium in Las Vegas, and I had all the goods. I was in Las Vegas with the hockey team, with the baseball team, everything, perfect alignment. Went to see the head of the LVCVA and the mayor, and I had all the facts and figures and fired the shit out of him. With every number, everything of the community, everything that was going on, perfect. The guy said, well, you're going to bring Rain Man here next year? Could you bring another movie here? I said, no. We're talking about professional baseball, with the experts in it, blah, 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 all the numbers, facts, and figures. And I left. And they didn't want to do it. In the entertainment capital of the world, I was a major entertainer, head of a major company. I was already there. All the things stars were aligned. And this young girl, this young intern, she must have been with us 6 months. We were sitting in the room, downloading the whole experience. God, I can't believe it. We have to leave that town now. This is terrible. We had a big investment there. And she said, well, she turned to me, what story did you tell him? She's been with me 6 months. What story did you tell him? And I went, I told him all the facts. He gave me every fact and figure. What ridiculous question that was. And I kind of embarrassed her, And then later that day, I kept thinking, what story did I tell that person? What story? And I didn't tell him any story. None at all. Not even anything. And I kept thinking, could that be the difference between success and failure? Could that be? And so that started the process going. Remember, it's, the pearls of wisdom, you put a little seed of a piece of sand, and it's in the right culture, the right environment, it turns into a pearl. And that seed and that discomfort turned into a pearl for me.
Let me just, as a way by wrapping up, in the last 3 to 4 years, Peter has ushered me through a personal transformation, which got me to look at this question as he's been writing this book, which is, first I thought it was the question of what story do I have to tell the world about what I want to do in this world. And I realized it was a different question, and that is that Peter helped me understand that the first story that I had to tell was to myself. So that when you send that tweet or email or you walk into a room before you put your words out there, if you know your story and it's deeply authentic to you, it will be felt by others in all the mediums.
So true. That congruence is absolutely critical. If you're hiding your goal, they'll see hiding. They don't even see goal. If you're not congruent, if you're not interested in your own story, they'll see, why should they be interested? You don't have to speak the words. So that's the key.
I had a conversation with somebody I like a lot and I respect, who was asking me a question about, they're in one business today, but it's not doing so well, and they have started a side business, but they really are passionate about this business, but they've got this side business, and they were asking, how do I position that? And I'm like, don't. Because what did you just tell me? You told me you're not passionate about this, to focus on it, and to go to the wall about it. How many of you have ever been at a party where someone's handed you 2 business cards with 2 businesses? It's kind of gross. I feel like, you know, odd and a little dirty taking them.
But you did.
Yeah, I do, but every time I see it, for me at least, the resonance is they don't know what their story is. And so my point to you is you walk up this door, and I do hope you decide to bring this gift to yourself. You got to figure out what your story is, but then make sure that you work for the rest of your life refining your ability to tell that story and its passions to others. And nobody has ever taken a more powerful subject and dissected it in a way to teach us how to do that more effectively. And my life has been changed personally because of my friendship with Peter, but more particularly because of the knowledge that I've gained from him and his journey in the last 3 years. Peter, I love you, and you're a gift to the world.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.